Evan Travers was a seasoned hiker who had always preferred solitude over crowded trails. On a crisp October morning, he set off alone into the dense woodlands of the Pacific Northwest, eager to explore a lesser-known section of the Olympic National Forest. He informed a coworker of his route and estimated return time, packed his gear, and disappeared into the wild. The first day went smoothly. The foliage was thick, the air damp and cool, and the trail unmarked but manageable. Evan camped near a small river and enjoyed a peaceful night under a cloud-covered sky. But as dawn broke on the second day, a thick, unnatural fog settled in. Evan found it odd how quickly it had rolled over the trees, swallowing the landscape in a gray, muffled silence. As he packed his tent, he noticed the forest had changed. The trees seemed taller, denser, and unfamiliar. Evan pulled out his GPS, but the screen flashed, "Error, no signal." He attempted to backtrack toward the river but couldn't find it. The fog distorted sound, and his footsteps felt muffled. Something about the air made him uneasy, like it was watching him. By midday, Evan came upon a crude wooden structure deep in the forest. It wasn't on any map and looked ancient, possibly a trapper's shack, long abandoned. But something was wrong. The wooden boards were warped and damp, but the ground around it was freshly disturbed, as if someone had recently walked there. Against his better judgment, Evan opened the door. Inside, there was no furniture, only hundreds of strange carvings on the walls. Symbols, concentric circles, and tally marks, some fresh, others faded by time. He turned to leave but stopped. A figure stood at the tree line, barely visible through the fog. It didn't move. It just stood there, like a statue in the mist. Evan stared for a moment, heart pounding, and then it slowly turned and walked back into the woods. He ran. Evan pushed through the underbrush, not knowing where he was going. He followed the sun, or what he assumed was the sun through the fog. Hours passed. His canteen emptied. His legs burned. As dust settled, he heard a faint humming. It was soft and melodic, almost mechanical, but it had no source. He covered his ears, but the sound grew louder inside his mind. Evan collapsed beneath a tree and passed out. When he awoke, the fog had lifted. The forest was back to its normal self. Birds chirped and the sky was blue again. A group of search and rescue volunteers found him the next morning, only a mile from the highway. Evan was dehydrated and delirious, but unharmed. What unsettled rescuers, however, was his journal. They found it tucked into his backpack, open to the last page. Written in large, erratic letters were the words, "It watches from the fog. It waits." Evan never hiked alone again, and he never spoke publicly about what happened. But sometimes when fog rolls in unexpectedly, he leaves town entirely. Casey Dunham was never afraid of the woods. As a child growing up in rural Montana, she spent countless hours hiking and camping with her family. Years later, at 31, she decided to take a solo weekend trip to clear her head after a difficult breakup. She picked a remote section of the Bitterroot National Forest, far from the tourist trails. She packed light but efficiently and planned a circular route that would take her back to her car by the third day. The first 24 hours were uneventful. Casey followed an old logging trail and made camp near a frozen creek. The only strange moment was hearing what she thought was a door creaking, odd considering there were no structures for miles. She dismissed it as the wind or a tree groaning. On the second day, while exploring off-trail, She found something she hadn't expected, a staircase. It stood in the middle of the forest, completely out of place, made of pale weathered wood with 13 steps, perfectly intact but leading to nothing. No platform, no building, just steps ascending into empty air. Casey froze. It wasn't part of any ruins or structure. The ground around it was undisturbed. Even the snow on top was clean, untouched. Something about it felt wrong, like it wasn't supposed to be there, or even real. She took a picture with her phone, but the screen glitched. The image turned black, and the phone powered off, though the battery had been at 70%. She backed away from the staircase and turned to leave, but realized she had no idea which way she'd come from. The sun had shifted, or maybe the clouds had thickened, but everything looked unfamiliar. Panic slowly crept in. She tried to retrace her steps, but every turn led to more trees. She circled back to where the staircase had been, but it was gone. Not just hidden, gone, as if it had never been there. That night she camped in a makeshift spot, her small fire casting flickering shadows. That's when she heard the footsteps. They were slow, deliberate, and circling her camp. She called out, thinking maybe another hiker had gotten lost, but no one answered. The footsteps stopped for a while, then resumed closer. She stayed awake the whole night, clutching a small hatchet. In the morning, she found footprints in the snow surrounding her tent. Bare feet, long and narrow, circling multiple times before vanishing into the pines. She resumed walking, trying to find a ridge or any sign of civilization. Her compass spun in circles. Her map was useless. Even the trees felt like they were watching. That afternoon, she stumbled upon a cabin, old, rotting, and half-collapsed, but shelter. As she approached, she noticed carvings on the door, symbols like spirals and triangles intersecting with crude stick figures. Inside was dark and cold. She found a dusty journal with pages dated over 40 years ago. One entry caught her attention. Saw the stairs again. Third time this week. They're closer. It's watching me sleep now. That night, Casey dreamed of the staircase. In her dream, it stretched far into the clouds and something was standing at the top. Watching, always watching. When she awoke, she was no longer in the cabin. She was back at her original campsite from the first day. Her fire pit was cold. Her gear was neatly arranged. Her phone was powered on, displaying the date, 3 days after she first went missing. When she finally made it back to her car, she broke down crying. Rangers later reviewed the area where she claimed to find the staircase. There was no trace of it, nor of the cabin. The GPS on her phone showed no movement after the first day. It was as if she had never left her original location. Casey never hiked alone again. She deleted the photo of the staircase, though sometimes she swore she could still see it in her phone's photo gallery, just for a moment before it vanished. Ethan Wallace had always been drawn to the solitude of nature. After years of working in a noisy city, he finally took a sabbatical from his tech job and headed to Oregon's Mount Hood National Forest. His plan was to spend a week camping alone, fishing, and hiking through the less traveled areas. He brought all the necessary supplies, including a radio beacon and GPS, but once deep in the woods, he chose to switch them off. He didn't want to be found, at least not right away. On the third day, he came across a pristine alpine lake that wasn't on any of the maps he had. The water was so still it looked like glass, reflecting the dense pine trees perfectly. It seemed untouched. No fire rings, no campsites, not even animal tracks near the shore. Something about the silence around it unsettled him. Even the birds were quiet. Still, he pitched his tent nearby and spent the day fishing, catching nothing. That night, under a blanket of stars, he drifted off to the sound of wind rustling the trees. At around 3 a.m., he woke up to the sound of someone whispering his name. Ethan. It was faint but unmistakable. He shot up, heart pounding. No one was around. The forest was still dead silent. He chalked it up to a dream and lay back down, but then he heard it again, clearer this time. Ethan. It was coming from the direction of the lake. Against better judgment, he unzipped his tent and stepped out. The surface of the lake was no longer still. It rippled slightly, as if something had just submerged. Mist drifted off the water in slow curls. He stood frozen for what felt like minutes, staring into the dark. Then he saw it. Something beneath the surface, pale and moving. He turned and ran back to his tent, locking himself inside until dawn. The next day, determined to leave, he packed up and tried to retrace his path. But the trails were gone. The trees all looked the same. His GPS wouldn't power on. The compass spun in slow, useless circles. For hours he wandered aimlessly, calling for help. The silence seemed to swallow his voice. Around sunset, he stumbled back into the same lake clearing. His gear was unpacked again, the tent reset. He hadn't done that. Panicking now, he backed away, only to trip on something under the moss. He brushed the ground aside and found a wooden post sticking up, old, blackened by time. Attached was a rusted metal plaque that read, "Missing Levi Jacobs, last seen August 12, 1997. Last known location, Silver Mirror Lake." Ethan had never heard that name or lake before. He tried to take a picture of the sign, but the screen on his phone cracked spontaneously, spiderwebbing without impact. It shut off and wouldn't restart. He didn't sleep that night. He sat by the fire with a stick in one hand and his pocket knife in the other. Again around 3 a.m., the voice returned. "Ethan." This time it was closer, less like a whisper and more like it was being spoken right behind him. He spun around. Nothing. But when he turned back to the fire, there was a figure crouched across the flames. It looked like a man, but too long, too pale. Its arms were impossibly thin, stretched across its knees. The face was vague, shifting, like smoke barely holding shape. It smiled. Ethan screamed and hurled a burning log at it. The figure vanished before it hit. He bolted from camp, sprinting through the trees, branches cutting his face, roots grabbing at his feet. He ran until his legs gave out, then collapsed in the cold dirt. When he woke, it was morning. He was lying in a gravel parking lot near the visitor station. A ranger was shaking him awake, asking if he was okay. He couldn't speak at first, just cried. He'd been missing for 2 full weeks. Search teams had scoured the trails and found no sign of him. His car was still in the lot. Yet when they retraced his steps, there was no lake. No Silver Mirror Lake on any map. Nothing matched his description. Ethan returned to city life, but nothing was the same. He never went near the woods again. And some nights just before sleep, he swears he can still hear that voice, calling him back. For years, Michelle Alvarez had dreamed of completing the entire Appalachian Trail. It was her ultimate bucket list goal. After turning 35 and finally saving enough for a 6-month sabbatical, she set out from Springer Mountain, Georgia, determined to reach Mount Katahdin in Maine. She was prepared, physically, mentally, and with all the right gear. She documented her trip daily, updating her blog and GPS tracker. Her posts were upbeat, full of scenic photos and humorous tales of trail life. Everything changed on day 59. Michelle had reached a remote section in Northern Virginia where cell service dropped completely and the forest thickened into endless green. That day, the weather turned quickly. Dark clouds rolled in, followed by a sudden freezing rain. She ducked into her tent early, trying to wait out the storm, but the rain didn't stop. It poured for 3 days straight. On the fourth morning, the rain lessened, and Michelle packed up her soaked belongings and continued north. Only, the trail didn't look the same. The white trail blazes, marking the Appalachian Trail, were gone. In their place were strange red symbols, vertical lines crossed by circles. Not spray paint, but carved deeply into the trees. She tried backtracking but ended up in the same clearing again and again. Her GPS wouldn't pick up a signal. Her compass spun erratically, like something magnetic was interfering. After a while, she came across a trail she didn't recognize. Narrow, overgrown, with moss-covered stones leading into a deeper part of the forest. She debated for hours. Go forward into the unknown or wait for rescue. Her food was running low. She decided to follow the path. At first, it felt oddly peaceful. The air was cooler. The trees whispered more than rustled. The trail, though faint, seemed deliberate, like it wanted her to follow. She walked for miles. Then she saw it, a house. It looked like a colonial-era cabin, tucked between massive trees. The wood was old, gray, and weather-worn, but there was no rot, no vines. The windows were intact. Smoke drifted from the chimney. Someone was inside. She approached, calling out. No one answered. When she knocked, the door creaked open on its own. Inside was silent. A fire burned in the hearth, but the room was empty. A rocking chair gently moved by itself. On the table sat a cup of tea, still steaming. Beside it, a journal. Michelle picked it up and read the first page. If you're reading this, the trail found you too. She read on, heart racing. The entries were from a man named Harold Keene, a hiker from 1962. He'd gotten lost in a storm, found the same trail, and arrived at this cabin. Each entry grew more frantic. He wrote of time moving strangely, of never getting hungry or thirsty, of nights that didn't end, of hearing his own voice whispering to him from the woods. The final page read, I don't think I ever left. I think I am the trail now. Michelle dropped the journal and ran. Outside it was dusk, though she'd only entered the cabin around noon. The sky was a burnt orange, but the sun wasn't visible. The trees looked wrong. They bent slightly inward, like leaning in to listen. She bolted down the trail, not caring where it led, just away. But the more she ran, the less the forest changed. It was the same trees, the same boulders, over and over. She collapsed eventually, shaking, and cried herself to sleep. She woke to silence. Not birds, not insects, nothing. Then, footsteps. A man stepped out from behind a tree. He was dressed in old, tattered clothes. He smiled warmly and said nothing. Michelle screamed. The man held out his hand, as if inviting her to follow. She refused, backing away. He nodded once, then turned and walked down the trail until he vanished completely. Moments later, her GPS beeped. It had signal. Michelle checked her phone. Her last known location was over 40 miles from where she thought she was. With trembling hands, she activated her emergency beacon. Rescuers found her the next morning. They said she'd been missing for 9 days. A search team had passed through her area multiple times without finding any trace. No footprints, no camp, nothing. When she described the cabin, locals told her there were legends of a walker's refuge deep in the forest, an old ghost story hikers shared around campfires. Michelle left the trail and never returned. She still hikes, but never alone. She later tried to find the spot again, with a team, cameras, and equipment. There was no trail, no cabin, just endless forest. And yet sometimes at night, she dreams of that fire, still burning, waiting. In 2019, Ethan Crowley set off for what he hoped would be a quiet weekend of solitude in Utah's Grand Staircase Escalante National Monument. A passionate nature photographer, Ethan was chasing the perfect golden hour shot, sandstone cliffs glowing orange under a desert sun, undisturbed by crowds or footprints. He didn't tell many people where he was going, just a quick text to his roommate. "Gone shooting in the canyons." Back Sunday. He never came back. Search teams combed the area for days when Ethan didn't return. His car was found parked at a remote trailhead, untouched. But no gear, no signs of struggle, nothing. His case faded into the background with hundreds of other missing hiker reports, until 2 years later, when he came walking out of the desert barefoot, sunburned and smiling. The rangers who found him said he looked disoriented, but otherwise healthy. When asked where he had been, he just said, "I wasn't lost. I was just with him." That's when the story took a strange turn. Ethan was taken to a hospital in Page, Arizona for evaluation. Doctors noted something unusual. He had no injuries, no dehydration. His beard had grown, but not by 2 years' worth, more like 2 weeks. His vitals were normal. His memory was intact. He knew his name, the date, even his emergency contact. But he couldn't account for the time he'd been missing. When police asked what happened, Ethan gave a vague, unnerving account. He said he'd hiked down into one of the slot canyons. Around dusk, he saw a narrow path that wasn't on any map, tucked between 2 rock walls. It felt wrong, but he followed it. The path led to a spiral rock formation, a perfect coil of red and white stone. As he stepped into the center, the wind stopped. Everything went silent. That's when he saw the man, or rather, the shape of one. It wasn't a hallucination, Ethan insisted. He felt the figure long before he saw it, a presence, ancient and unblinking. The man wore no clothes, his skin dry and cracked like canyon stone. His eyes were empty sockets that still somehow looked at you. Ethan said the man never spoke, but thoughts formed anyway, ideas, feelings, questions that didn't sound like his own voice. The man pointed to the spiral, and Ethan stepped in. What happened after that is harder to explain. He described days that felt like minutes, and minutes that stretched into years. Time moved sideways. He would blink, and the stars would shift positions. He'd sleep and wake under different skies, some filled with twin moons, others with suns that pulse like heartbeats. He wasn't alone. The man was always nearby, never approaching, never retreating, just watching. Eventually, Ethan said he felt something click inside him, like a decision had been made, not by him, but about him. And then he was back, waking up on the floor of a canyon. The sun was rising, his camera was gone, his pack missing. He had no shoes, but he wasn't cold, or hungry, or afraid. He walked out and was found 3 miles from his last known position. When doctors told him he'd been missing for 731 days, Ethan didn't react. He said it felt right. After discharge, Ethan refused interviews and deleted all his social media. But a reporter from a local paper managed to speak with him anonymously. In the brief conversation, he offered one final cryptic statement. There are places out there that don't care about time or people. They wait. And when someone notices them, they notice back. Then he walked away. To this day, no one knows exactly what happened to Ethan Crowley in that canyon. Geologists have found no trace of the spiral rock formation he described. Searchers have gone looking, but found only sandstone and silence. Ethan now lives off-grid, somewhere in New Mexico. He doesn't hike anymore. But every year, on the date he came back, he leaves a small rock spiral outside his front door, just in case the man returns.